on the new leaders to be able to deliver some things that can result in different quotidian experiences. My humble proposition. You're not going to remove the corruption problem immediately, but you remove some of the basis for it by giving decent salaries to people in the security sector. We all know that many of the elements of corruption, whether it is in the police or crime or whatever, has to do with economic conditions under which people are living and working. Have to do with broader than economics. I remember when I was, how many of you read or bought a book that I wrote called Drugs and Security, Sovereignty on the Sea? Well, each of you has a responsibility to buy one, get one to a friend. When I was researching that book, I came here among many places to have a nice big grant from MacArthur Foundation. I still remember, I think it was telling Desmond Roberts, or was it Gavin? Commissioner Control of Customs said to me, Professor, here are some of the realities. You people are criticizing the custom officers for not doing their job at the airport. These people don't get enough salary. Some of these officers, when they get off duty at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, they have to drive through dangerous, dark streets to get to their homes. Why should they put their lives on the line? He was just explaining a reality. So it's not only the salary you give to them, it's if they don't have a sense of their own safety, they're not going to be willing risk takers. And so, you've got to start someplace. I say start with some basic salary. Unions are never going to be happy with what you give them, but you've got to start some way in enabling people to feel a certain comfort with if there's an opportunity for an act of omission. And we all know that many of these corruption-related experiences are not only by acts of commission, like acts of omission. I'm just not going to turn up at a certain place. I know what happened. I'm just not going to deploy my platoon or my squad or my division. And I get something in a little small piece of it. But here is what I would also recommend. Especially considering that this has to be a national enterprise with a whole society approach. As people, individual and corporate citizens, to do some enhancement of their own security protection and detection over and above Roger the dog, the Baraga. You can have 10 bulldogs in your yard. You can't rely upon the bulldog only as a security detection. What about some tax incentives if businessmen or individual citizens purchase and install certain detection? Many societies that some of us live in. The insurance company gives you an incentive deduction. Might it not be an incentive that the government can give, a way of keeping its own bill at a reasonable, ask the society to invest in their own contribution to ameliorate this problem, but give them an incentive to do it. Next slide, please. Our society and many other jurisdictions in the Caribbean have an unfortunate way of retiring people at the prime of their capacity for productivity. I say bring back some of those people who retired at 55, who want to work, who can contribute, who have got good experiential basis. Don't let them have to go look in the private sector to eke out a supplement to their pension. Now, it is also possible to extend the retirement age beyond 55 to something else. But at the very least, capture some of the good, productive experiences that can help to ameliorate the situation in the near term. That is something that I would recommend. But I want to end on what is on the top right. 15 years or so ago, I coined a concept called solution by platitude syndrome. And it is not limited to the Caribbean, it is true of also Latin America particularly. People have the sense that because the Prime Minister gives a big speech or the President gives a big speech, or you sign a treaty, or you sign a memorandum, that solves the problem. very little attention to implementing, very little attention to evaluating. People don't want to know that they did something wrong. Nobody wants to be subject to it. I call that the solution by platitude syndrome. The onus is on this new government to avoid that solution by platitude syndrome. The Prime Minister, the President, or the ministers can speak as voluminously and articulately as possible. Those speeches by themselves are going to be of null and void effect if the actual reality does not change. And this syndrome is one that has been dogging the hemisphere. Big speech, treaty, who follows up? As a matter of fact, sometimes, I've had this experience in the Caribbean, some of the agencies that have responsibility for this new treaty don't even know the treaty was signed. Nobody sent them a copy. But, next slide please. So let's shift gears since time is running and I know people want to fall asleep and they want to give Malcolm some money. I said, let me find something akin to the Kaichor News editorial that may capture part of the challenge of the external insecurity source. And I went back to something that President Ranger said in the National Assembly last week. Now, if you're a man from Mars who just came and read this, you may have a limited view of the nature of the external challenge. Next slide, please. If you read that statement and you focus on Guyana's challenge from Venezuela only in relation to la zona de reclamación, you will have a partial appreciation of the external. Next slide, please. More recent in that configuration of external is the maritime. But then, as you'll see in the next slide, and I think we all know, there is much more to the external. Next slide, please. There is much more to the external source of insecurity than the Venezuela claim. We still have a 15,000 square kilometers claim on the eastern front. If Venezuela had its way, and Suriname had its way, the dear land of Guyana would be this. We all know that the Venezuela claim was settled in 1899. We all know that the genesis of the resurgence of that claim dates to Severo Maleprevo's posthumous letter. We all know that even though Maleprevo wrote that letter in 46 and it was revealed in 49, it was not until 1962, as the imminence of Guyana's independence and as the United States Geological Survey results showed minerals, that Venezuela said, you know, this thing really was, Maleprevo was right when he wrote this thing. I was a practicing journalist in 1981 when the imminence of the end of the Protocol of Port of Spain. Who knows what the Protocol of Port of Spain is? Everybody. Protocol of Port of Spain for our young scholar here. Not very good. The Protocol of Port of Spain was a freezing of the claim that was negotiated by Eric Williams. When in 1970, Eric Williams convinced Venezuela and Guyana to just freeze this thing. Let's chill out, to use the language of the young ones, for 12 years. And see. And let, at the end of the 12 years, let's talk about either renewing it or going in another direction under the Geneva Agreement. And so, as the protocol's end was nigh, there was a lot of anxiety. I was on a trip to Venezuela. Did not appreciate until about the second day in Caracas why the Venezuelan national anthem played like almost every 15 minutes. was to keep the jingoism, the nationalism. It's a very nice national anthem, by the way. This claim, and the president captured it quite rightly, as dogless for 50 years. He's in a bone in his throat. Next slide, please. But remember that Suriname also had a claim. As a matter of fact, Suriname had two claims, a maritime claim and a territorial claim. The maritime claim was settled by the United Nations Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. If you're interested in the outcome of that Law of the Sea Tribunal, read the book by Sridhar Ramphal, who was part of the Guyana team, assembling all the documents, putting together the explanations. That maritime claim was settled. Guyana got 85% of what was the disputed maritime space. Suriname got 15%. But the territorial dispute still lingers. As a matter of fact, the territorial dispute actually was settled, but not consummated. World War II interrupted the consummation of the agreement between Holland and Britain. And so that claim has persisted, and what is troubling to me, and I've written about it, is not only President Barra Jagdeo going to speak in the Surinamese parliament and standing under a map of Suriname with Guyana's territory in it. Suriname. But Suriname used to do a Venezuela for a long time. In Suriname's internal map, it would show a river. It took a leap forward in 1989. It went to a World Bank Forum and put a map of Suriname with that territory in it. Guyana has not been able to get Suriname to revise that map. And I wrote an article, I wrote a study for the Southern Command when Desi Bouterse got elected. Remember, May 2010, Desi Bouterse was elected. The United States Southern Command asked me to do an assessment. The worry was, would Suriname under Bouterse become a narco state? I did an extensive analysis to show that it would not. But I spent some time doing an analysis of what I call Guyana's Western Front. And I made the promise in that, it's a promise that I hope does not come true. I said that in 50 years, the world is going to come to define Suriname the way that World Bank document has it. Because people are going to take that World Bank document and it will be reproduced, and reproduced, and reproduced. And if there is not an official redefinition of the cartography of Suriname and of Guyana, that by default is going to be Suriname. Don't know if you read Desi Bouterse's statement when he was re-elected a few weeks ago. He said, what? We will be working actively to peacefully get that territory that belongs to us. And so for me, part of the anxiety with the external element of the insecurity needs to go beyond Venezuela, even though Suriname is not acting up now. Bouterse has put us on notice that something is coming down the pipe. He intends to do something about that. Next slide, please. 15,000 square kilometers. And so let me end by asking a version of question 2 in relation to territorial disputes, to really ask in relation to that. What are some things that the new leaders, mindful of the anxiety to change the quotidian experiences in relation to territorial threats? And if you want to have an appreciation of the economic aspect of security, it is that territorial aspect. I don't know how many of you listened to or read President Grainger's articulate exposition on July 9th. He identified the economic impact of what Venezuela has been doing over the decades. That's economic security. When you tell foreign investors not to come, when you take out big newspaper articles in London, when you dissuade, intentionally you're undermining the society's economic security. So it's not just the theoretical patria sovereignty, it is undermining economic viability, it's undermining economic security. So in the context of that, overall short, albeit very short assessment, what might be some things for the new leaders to ponder next slide? Some of us in the room might remember the 1970s, 80s. And it had to do with the imminence of the end of the Protocol called Spain, when Prime Minister then, Forbes Barnum, and the leadership at the time crafted a strategy called defense diplomacy. Defense diplomacy had to do with a recognition of a reality that exists in an even more dramatic way, that Guyana militarily was no match for Suriname. And so you had to enjoin the international community, you've got to use the diplomatic mechanisms to ensure that the world understands the threat, and the world comes and lends its sympathy and sometimes more. I have a recommendation to the new leaders. You better start getting with a defense diplomacy strategy. But that strategy is going to need quick attention to some of the significant deficits in the last 23 years under foreign affairs establishment. You've got to build credibility, build competence, and you don't have 2 years to do it. You've got to call back some of those experts, you've got to tap into the diaspora. But I think it's important to complement that defense diplomacy with a public diplomacy. How many, let's guess, what proportion of the Guyanese citizenry you think understands anything about this Venezuela claim? Its genesis, its nature, what's happening. It's important, in my view, to have a campaign. Put all the relevant documents in one website. Use social media. Every time the president speaks, that video should go, not only the presidency page, it should go into that, whatever the defense diplomacy, the public diplomacy place is. I applaud Vincent for taking the lead with Foreign Minister to have last Sunday. And I said it is I'm kind of regretful that I'm getting there after Sunday. What they did at Christian Liberal College needs to be replicated across this country. You've got to go and explain to the people what it's all about. People have so many things competing for their attention that some of this is going to be over their heads. They extend to be loyal, they extend to be patriotic. You can play not a blade of grass as much as you want. But if people don't have a deeper than that appreciation, I argue that a public diplomacy campaign needs to be pursued. Yes, the judicial settlement option, the Foreign Minister quite rightly I think said, is the option to be pursued. But you know what that Guyanese saying is, in terms of immediate term, longer term, you've got to be careful that while the grass is growing, the horse is not starving. While you pursue that judicial settlement, which is a years in the making thing, you've got to do something in the interim. You can figure out what that something is going to be. But particularly in relation to the Venezuela demands in relation to the rice, or the Venezuela's decisions in relation to rice, something has got to be done, and I'm delighted to hear from what I read and speak before. Things have already begun to be put in place. We've got to find alternative markets. The energy security initiatives have got to go immediately to find alternative sources of hydrocarbon to Venezuela. The oil from ExxonMobil or CXG or Espol is not going to come fast enough to supplant the reliance on Venezuela. We've got to have a contingency. People in the diaspora, one is right here, Dr. Vince Adams. One of the anxieties of many of us in the diaspora is that the talent is not being used. Something needs to be done to begin to position is just as how we gave notice, we're going to stop this thing. Petrocaribe is not ad infinitum. It can be negotiated to end. Build coalitions. Coalition building has begun. And so next slide, please. As we come to the end, and I know I've spoken very briefly, only about 5 minutes, but I think I need to stop at this point. I want to kind of end where we began. And that is with a reminder of what Jorge Dominguez said in that book, On Pirates and Drug Lords. The most common sources of insecurity of our people has to do with threats to the everyday. Crime is one of those quotidian, everyday experiences affecting the citizens. Next slide, please. We know that security is a matter of degree, and people want increased comfort that the crime source of insecurity is being ameliorated. Citizens have a legitimate right to express interest in having appropriate management of the territorial disputes so that business can go on appropriately, so visitors can come without the sense of somebody going to run you out the space. Next slide, please. But the more you focus on any one country, now this is the slide on which I want to pause and have conversation. Whether it's crime or the external threats driven by territorial claims, the reality is that not only is the nature of the source beyond one nation, doing something about it, managing it, requires going beyond one nation. And something that former Prime Minister, former President E.N.R. Robinson said years ago in Trinidad is that something that I really wanted to leave as a final word. My plea here is for what I think is already known and accepted and pursued by what the President is doing, what the Prime Minister is doing, what the Vice President for International Affairs is doing. This has got to be a broader than Guyana pursuit. And I like the way in which Prime Minister Robinson exquisitely captured whatever the dilemma, whatever the source of insecurity, whatever the challenge. It is becoming increasingly apparent that no single state, large or small, can in isolation ensure its own security from subversion or external threat. How many of you have read the book, The World is Flat? I don't see many hands going up. Right? You didn't have to read Thomas Frieden's The World is Flat to know that we are living in an age of globalization. In this era of interdependence of states and the globalization of activities relating to almost every sphere of life, the preservation of national security can no longer be seen in purely national terms. That is true of Trinidad and the region he was talking about. Rather than one country term, it is true of Guyana. And part of the necessity for the new leaders is how to manage these expectations, knowing that they've got to tap into more than Guyana in bringing help with crime, in bringing help in managing the territorial disputes, in doing it in a way in which you want to keep your national interests always front and center. Sometimes in people's anxiety to help, they want to offload stuff that is not helpful to you. It is good for their inventory to be reduced. And it is good for them to say, well, I've given country X million dollars. You have got to take what is in your interest. And so part of the challenge of this, rather than one nation, is how do you say yes to things which help you? being given or offered by the United States, or offered by Canada, or offered by Trinidad. The onus is on the new leaders, more so because they are managing expectations in so many areas. The tendency to just say, yes, I'll take it. That tendency has to be tempered with a reflection of, do I really think this is going to help my cause? And if it doesn't help my cause, don't take it. I want to end on that note and open it up for questions and comments.